It is enough.
You got 4 minutes to go. Do you want to play the whole thing or fade it at some point?
Fade it.
Let me know when. Close to the end?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Pass. Good afternoon, Santa Cruz. Good afternoon, those in Santa Cruz County and those listening airwaves wide. This is Unheard Voices today from 3 to 4 p.m. on Fridays. I'm your host this week, Mr. Thairie Ritchie, and I'm very honored and blessed to have this gentleman in the studio today, live guest in the studio again. He is a community organizer and community activist. He has his own podcast series, which you can tune in on our different platforms, including YouTube, as well as other social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook, called Burn the Wagon Series. Definitely focusing around Indigenous issues, Indigenous situations that he's discussing as well. And I'm very blessed to have him in the studio, Mr. Juan Dominguez. How you feeling today, Hibbs?
I'm feeling good, man. Thank you very much for having me in the studio. It feels good to be here. And thank you for everyone behind the scenes making this happen, too. This is really awesome. This is really special.
Definitely. Likewise. Thank you, Mr. Howard Philstein, for playing that beautiful intro. I just want to give a shout out to the group Zion I, local hip-hop group in the Bay Area region. Just recently, unfortunately, this week, one of the artists that you're listening to on the track from the group, Mrs. Zumbai. He unfortunately passed away at the age of 49 this week due to COVID symptoms. So it's definitely very serious. During these times, definitely be safe and be careful out there. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones. He passed away at 80 years old as well this week. And definitely want to give a shout out to Zion I. I definitely appreciate hearing that track. Definitely coasting. So
Yeah, man. If you've ever seen him live, he's an incredible live performance to see. He gives everything in his live performance. So that's unfortunate to lose him. He's a definite incredible loss to the hip hop game of the Bay Area for sure.
Definitely. And yeah, man, let's get right into
Yeah,
it.
let's get into it.
And so the first topic, just to let listeners know, just to give in context, so the first topic we'll be discussing today is a series of, social systemic topics that I'll be discussing with Juan today in the studio. And the first topic, we're going to get right into it. So the 2020 consensus results showed a huge increase in the Native American population, which was reported by CNN. Just to give further context for the listeners right now. So in 2020, the number of people who identified as Native American and Alaskan Native alone, and in combination with other races, was 9.7 million. So up from 5.2 million in 2010. They now account for 2.9% of all people living in the United States, according to the Census Bureau. The group was not exempt to the unprecedented growth of multiracial Americans across the country. So in the past decade, they had a 160% increase that experts believe that was driven by a myriad of factors, including more mixed-race families, the struggle that Latinos face during racial self-identification, and Americans wanting to embrace their heritage even if they're not recognized as tribal members. And so, Mr. Juan Dominguez, I wanted to ask you this first question with this topic. So, did the U.S. Indigenous population really increase that much?
I don't think so. So what I think it is like he's pointed out, more people are identifying as Indigenous as of late, and even though they're not tied to a tribal ID or a tribal number that they have, I still think it's awesome that they're identifying as that. So I don't think it's like the population has risen or anything. I think technically more people are just identifying as Indigenous. Because I come from a reservation that I can't even remember the last time the census went out there and counted actually how many people are out there, on the reservation. So I think a big thing is and like you said, the from 2010 to 2020, is that the only times in 10 years that they've really gone out and counted all these people. So I think it's a mix of things. So maybe the population has risen up, but also maybe more people are identifying as Indigenous or Native American, which I fully support. I fully support people of Mexican descent identifying as Indigenous. Yeah.
Yeah, at least my follow-up is I very appreciate you bringing up the reservations aspect of those underrepresented, and so it's kind of my follow-up with this question is do you believe Indigenous communities have been historically undercounted and underfunded as communities?
Yeah, man, absolutely. Like I said, I grew up my whole life on a reservation, and we've been underfunded completely our whole lives. There's no money for us to do anything. There's no community centers. There's nothing like that in those types of spaces. There's no spaces for us to exist in that. And then when we don't have those, we're not comfortable going off the reservation to exceed in these things that we might be comfortable in. But at the end of the day, it's hard for us to leave the reservation because, like you said, we're underfunded. There's no motivation to get us out of there because we don't have any role models that we see around us that get to these spaces and leave this space and show us that we can bring the funding back, we can bring the attention back, we can bring things like that back to the reservation if we try. You know what I mean? But yes, definitely there's also reservations in the Navajo Nation. There's places where they don't have any running water. So during this whole pandemic, how are they supposed to wash their hands? How are they supposed to keep clean from the pandemic? And they don't have they're not wanting people to come in because the pandemic is so bad, so they're not having access to the right healthcare, they're not having the right access to masks, they're not having the right access to a lot of things. So definitely they're underfunded, they're underprivileged, pretty much under everything, you know.
Definitely, it's definitely reflective of the recent, things that are going on with the indigenous population. Definitely on my time feed, coming into the station, I was seeing a lot of stuff about the Line 3 pipeline over in Minnesota. Definitely, I think it was recent, I think a lot of correspondents in the political sphere was shocked, essentially, by seeing the voter turnout, by the indigenous population in many, states in the West, including Arizona, New Mexico, other states, across the Midwest, region that has, the underfunded, like you're saying, underfunded, indigenous population. I think, thankfully, in a lot of ways, I think in 2020, I think it raised a lot of social awareness, not just, as a community organizer myself, identifying as a black male with the Black Lives Matter movement, but I think with so many other movements that had the same inspiration, the same urge to be vocal and be, urgent and vocal and vocalize, the needs and the issues that are going on, including the indigenous population, which I felt, increased a lot, during last year. I think given the issues that we've been hearing about, just recently with residential schools and other issues that's been going on, systemically as far as the indigenous population, it's always been that talk in social circles, but I think as far as hearing it in the mainstream eyes, as far as social media and other, media news outlets, I think it's definitely, a blessing in a lot of ways, and I think it's one of those moments where it's a teaching moment in those ways where it's like a lot of people will hear these issues and hear things such as, why it's important to hear a 2020 consensus increase of indigenous population, say, why does that matter? And quite frankly, as you were alluding to, when it comes to having access to healthy sanitation, things such, as far as clean drinking water and other, important community resources that many communities really thrive on, especially during the pandemic. It's definitely important to have, those numbers of people and folks, counted and represented, as far as be able to get more resources and funding.
And also, that's exactly what I was about to say, is like maybe this jump in population will make people realize we're still here and we still have a population and we still need help. We need our voices heard, and we're not being heard at this point in time. You know what I mean? And that's a very good point, is maybe this jump in this population is the time where they're going to start listening.
Exactly. And before we get into our next topic, I just want to remind new listeners who are tuning in right now, you're tuning in to 90.7 FM, ksqd Santa Cruz. Thank you for those who are tuning in right now to ksqd.org. This is Unheard Voices here on Fridays from 3 to 4 p.m. I'm your host this week, Mr. Thairie Ritchie, and you're just listening to my very special guest live in the studio today, Mr. Juan Dominguez, community organizer, community activist, and has his own podcast as well called Burn the Wagon Series, which is available on different platforms, including YouTube and social media. And we were just talking about the recent 2020 consensus results that resulted in a huge increase in the indigenous population, but we're going to go right into our next topic for today. And this one's more of an educational topic as well when it comes to indigenous history in the United States. So this one is very important this week that I found in my timeline, so I want to discuss it with you all. So recently, the Colorado governor rescinds the 1860s order that led to the massacre of Native Americans. So I'm going to put in further context for the listeners right now. So Colorado Governor Jared Polis recently signed an executive order officially rescinding two 1860s era proclamations that was put in place by Colorado's second territorial governor at the time, John Evans. Both proclamations were intended to target and endanger the lives of Native Americans. So Governor Polis was accompanied by citizens of the Southern Ute. Please correct me on this one. I want to butcher your name.
I think it's Ute.
Yeah, Ute Mountain, Chene, and Aparato tribes. Please correct me on that one.
Arapaho.
Yeah. Thank you, Juan. Appreciate that. I knew I was going to struggle. I wanted to be respectful at the same time. So many of those tribes were dressed in traditional attire, and during the ceremony at which he removed the orders. And so he said in the quote that he hopes that the largely symbolic gesture can make amends for sins of the past. And so one of the two orders issued by Evans at the time when he made this order, called for citizens of the then territory to kill Native Americans and take their property. And it is widely agreed that to have contributed to the Sand Creek Massacre in November of 1864, when nearly 700 men cavalry attacked and killed an estimated hundreds of Chene and
Arapaho.
Aparapaho. So Chene and Aparapaho people, the majority of them, governor following, and the governor he left following those massacres at the time. And so, Juan, I just want to get your initial thoughts on Governor Polis' executive order of this 1860s orders.
Yeah, I mean, it's really awesome. It's a symbolic gesture, like he said. But it's what my first thought is, like, how many more little laws that we don't really know about that kind of exist like this in like other like cities or towns or places where we're not really paying attention, that got kind of swept under the rug and still exist. It's just crazy to me that they sent a 700-man army to kill women, Two-Spirit, men, children, with they didn't give the tribes or anything any like warning. They didn't say we're coming to war or nothing like that. They just came in one day and just started destroying these tribes. My main thoughts is like how many more little laws like this exist that we don't really know about. I'm kind of like dumbfounded that something like this still exists. So reading into it, it's a little bit weird. Just because, like you said, they were endangering Native lives just for their land, and that's a big thing for me, is like getting land back. It's just to have the land and the rightful owners of that land, just to have just some type of say in what's going on. And like you mentioned before, the Line 3, the pipeline is they're not asking any tribes what they want. They're just going right through the land, and there's the oil spills destroy the water. They destroy the land, the environment around. It destroys the animals. Can't eat the animals. Can't do anything with it. Can't do anything with the land. And there's certain things we do with the land too. We use everything. We use everything for traditional like medicine, traditional just attire that we use things to wear. So, I kind of veered off in your question, but...
I know, it's definitely good, brother. It's definitely good. So definitely, I think, the Colorado governor making this executive order, rescinding, these two unfortunate, laws that were really still in the books up until he signed this executive order. I think it's definitely, people kind of gloss over that, factor that these two orders from 1860s that led to the massacre, really genocide, as you're alluding to, of Indigenous people, historically through decades. So this results in trauma and a lot of tragedies of Indigenous families and communities, within the state of Colorado. And just recently, I was talking to a friend, just the other day, I was kind of, bringing up these topics I was going to bring into the show, and I was bringing up, the issue in Colorado, and they were telling me how family members were, who identify as Indigenous were afraid to go through the state of Colorado because they knew about, these, past histories, and knew of these, laws that were in the books at the time. So them even, essentially, driving or trying to travel, cross country, they would, purposely avoid going through the state of Colorado, which I can even imagine is a scary factor, having these laws in the books up until, just recently.
Yeah, and it just like goes back to just like another type of like segregation of people, like, you know what I mean? Just like don't belong, and that's how we felt, and that's why a lot of people don't really leave the reservation, because they feel like you said, they don't even want to drive through this town or this city. Because they feel like they're going to be hurt, or something's going to happen to them or their family. And then as for as like long as like the them being there at the signing of the thing with their traditional attire, I think that's amazing, because it goes to show that we wear these things. It's not a mascot. It's not a funny thing to wear on Halloween. We wear these things for certain things. And it's an honor for that person to be wearing that, those things, you know. So I think that's a really awesome thing for them to wear that traditional attire during the signing of that.
Right. That's definitely powerful as well. And I wanted to ask this follow up with this question as you know, referring to the state of Colorado, do you think the state should take more accountability for the massacres that took place within the state, you know, during this, you know, timeline period?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was saying before, and I think land back is a big thing, you know. And I'm not saying push people out that are there right now and living there. I'm just saying that there's certain things that happens on these lands that the original inhabitants have no say over. And looking at these certain lands, they didn't want to leave those lands. Their families, they've been there for traditionally years after years and years. You know, they lived off that certain land. So when they're pushed to a different land, they don't really know what to do with that land that they're pushed to. So I think that's a big accountability thing is giving land back. And like there's certain, like I said before, there's certain tribes that don't have water. Give adequate housing and adequate water and adequate living situations to these families and these people that don't have anything.
And I think from, you know, my perspective, you know, as a, you know, fellow organizer and activist, I think when it comes to terms of defund, of refund, you know, from, you know, allocating funds from, you know, institutions like the, you know, the police department and other, you know, institutions that haven't really, you know, necessarily helped, you know, a lot of societal situations. I think when you speak to that, you know, as far as, you know, I think that's the true kind of accountability when it comes to making up for these tragedies, is definitely providing a lot for indigenous communities on the financial end, as far as resource end, you know, moving forward, especially in the state of Colorado when it comes to having adequate drinking water, as you were saying, having, you know, adequate housing, you know, housing that's fully secured and fully, you know, up to code, you know, necessarily also, you know, having even, you know, access to resources as you're, you know, I was just listening to a different, you know, something the other day, and it was talking about, you know, when it came to the issue of voting for the indigenous communities, as I was bringing up earlier, you know, they didn't have, you know, many, you know, reservations, and many tribes didn't have access to, you know, mailing addresses or proper mailing addresses, you know, have to go far and wide, you know, from the reservation to, you know, even essentially pick up mail that they had expecting, you know, even that, you know, came in, you know, probably weeks late, you know, due to the, you know, time frame of availability of, you know, the postal service essentially. And so,
and some people may not even have access to a mailbox, or they may not even have access to the mailman or mail service getting to their reservation. So that's a big thing too. And I know for me, I didn't vote for a really long time because I didn't want to contribute to a system that, you know, essentially wiped out my people. But I think at this point, the only way that we can take it back or we can change things is to get in there and disrupt things. And I'm not talking like the one token Native or the one token Black person or the one token Asian person get in there, and then once they get in there, they don't do anything for the people that they said they're going to do for it. I'm talking like a group of people get in there and start changing things. Because I think in my mind, that's the only way we can start making changes and get legislations changed and get stuff changed, you know, is we get in there and we make a difference in places that they don't want us in.
Right. And I think that's reflective too when you bring it up. I think definitely that's really the true change when it comes to making, you know, awareness and making, you know, things happen, such as this, you know, important, you know, legislation that just passed. I think having more, you know, vocal awareness of encouraging more folks of color, you know, including Indigenous as well as Black, to get involved in politics a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, definitely a few years ago, before getting organized, it was definitely disheartening, you know, hearing that, you know, similar sentiment, you know, from, you know, my community as well, as far as saying, you know, why does my vote matter? You know, what's the point of voting? And I think, you know, given, you know, the recent, you know, last year elections, it definitely proved a point to where, you know, the more vocalness, the more awareness, the more, you know, outreach of people turning out to vote really does make a difference.
Yeah.
And even like political decisions and people putting people in power, as you alluded to, you know, I was thinking about Ms. Deb Haaland recently, Interior, you know, Secretary of Interior, you know, doing now investigations within the U.S. as far as investigating, you know, residential schools within the United States that took place, boarding schools that took place in the United States, as well as the missing murder Indigenous women campaign, you know, as far as launching, you know, an investigative team to really, you know, launch that, you know, criminal investigation of these cases of missing murder Indigenous women. So I think that's important as well to keep raising that vocal awareness on the political sphere.
Absolutely, and you mentioned missing murdered Indigenous women, and I want to mention Nicole Smith, and I want to mention Khadijah Britton, who are two women who, one was murdered on a Manchester Pointer reservation where I grew up, and they still haven't found the killer, and they still are looking for Khadijah Britton. They haven't found her at all. So I just mainly want to shout their names out first and foremost about that situation. So yeah.
Thank you for blessing their names. And then if you don't mind, definitely bless their names one more time into the airway.
Absolutely. Nicole Smith and Khadijah Britton.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And before we keep going, I just want to remind new listeners who are just now tuning in, thank you for tuning in today from 3 to 4 p.m. This is Unheard Voices here on 90.7 FM, ksqd Santa Cruz. Thank you for those who are listening also on ksqd.org on listen to KSQD live stream. I'm your host, Mr. Thairie Ritchie, this week on Unheard Voices, and I'm here with my special guest you're just listening to. He's a community organizer, community activist, and also has his own podcast series right now, which is available on different platforms. Burn the Wagon series, Mr. Juan Dominguez. And we're just going right into our next topic for today that we want to discuss with you all. And so the next topic is here locally in California. So it's over in Antioch, California, rather. So the Antioch mayor essentially apologized for the city's anti-Asian past, which was 145 years later to be exact. And to put some further context for this topic, so the Antioch, California is one of the many California cities, including Los Angeles and Santa Ana, where white residents lynched Chinese people or burned down their neighborhoods in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And this was a result of Chinese immigrants coming to the area during the California Gold Rush period. And Mayor Lamar Throp of Antioch, California, was elected during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, being one of the first black mayors of the community. And he believes that now is the right time to recognize his town's anti-Asian history. And so, Juan, I just want to get your initial thoughts on Mayor Throp's acknowledgement and apology of the city's anti-Asian past.
It's a good apology, It just sucks it has to come, like you said, 145 years later, just like the topic we were just discussing. But my first thoughts are kind of like, why when communities like this, an Asian community, or like we've seen in Tulsa, why do people have to come in and destroy these cities that are thriving and doing so well at those times and period? Why do and that's happened with numerous tribes throughout the United States. Their cities and their towns have kind of been destroyed. It's just like, those are my thoughts. Like, why do cities and stuff like that have to be destroyed when they're thriving? Why can't people come in and say, hey, how are you guys doing this so we can do it like this on our side? Or why can't we make the whole city like this?
Right. And I think for me, when I heard about this is when you bring that up, I think the reason of why, essentially. I think for me, when I looked at it from outside, from a macro lens, I kind of look at the issue of capitalism, how the issue of capitalism has been kind of, unfortunately, a foundation of the United States and how the United States has operated over time. And I think, with the issue of capitalism, for me, to be, on my own merit when I speak this, is I think it kind of ties into, issues of white supremacy and kind of hatred,
Mm-hmm.
Towards people of color, from all different communities, whether it be Indigenous, Asian or Black.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you hear about Tulsa, you hear about, many of, Chinatowns across the United States that were essentially burnt to the ground, as well as, Indigenous, communities that were thriving and essentially, terrorized and burnt to the ground. I think it was that initial fear of capitalism, because I think when the issue I've heard about, white supremacy, the goal of it is that if you can convince the poorest, white individual if you can convince the poorest white individual that they're better than a person of color who may be equally as poor, or if not poorer than them, then that's essentially the goal of white supremacy, is to insert that superiority. And I think, when it comes to seeing, towns in the past, like a Black Wall Street, or even in Chinese town communities, essentially, economically thriving, during these, periods of time. I think it came with a lot of, I think, I wouldn't say envy, but a lot of, internal insecurity about, hey, I thought I was superior, in that sense. And I think it kind of correlates to that issue of, white supremacy egging on that hatred of saying, hey, you deserve a lot more than this person of color right now. Why are they, thriving? You're not, instead of, internalizing it of, maybe I need to improve better, maybe I need to, thrive a little bit better, it turned into hatred,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
No, that's an absolutely good point. Yeah. And yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point to think about it. I didn't really think about it from that's like that aspect. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a follow-up question with this topic as well. And so I wanted to ask: Should the descendants of this unfortunate past should be compensated for the city's past historical trauma?
I think if they can track down the homeowners, the business owners, and stuff like that, then absolutely, and for me, I think to give back any type of businesses, any type of land, I can't push that enough. That land, that business, because we tend to, like, when we get, if they get some type of compensation in money, it tends to go pretty fast. I'm guilty of it. When we got the stimulus check, I was like, I'm gonna go get me some new shoes. I'm gonna go get me some new clothes. I'm gonna get a tattoo. I'm gonna get all kinds of stuff.
What the kids call the stimmy.
Yeah, the stimmy. So like, I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. When we get some free money. So that's my main reason of, like, when people get compensation, I want it to be like in something that you can attain, you can continue building on and continue building with. If you're given that business, you can continue to build that business. You can continue to build on that land. That's why I'm a big believer in that. And I do believe in compensation. I just don't believe in money, because I think we need to get away from that money hungry ideal.
Right. That's definitely important. Instead of definitely it is a definitely interesting thing. You kind of bring that up instead of handing out money. And I think essentially kind of funding and aiding a lot of, community resources, which is definitely, more important and more needed, essentially during this period of time. Definitely as, we deal with the eviction moratorium recently, the Supreme Court, I was just reading about on my timeline, issues with, evictions as well as housing, as far as establishing wages right now. When it comes to issue of 15-hour minimum wage, I think it's important to definitely, establish, security, economic security for, people in those needed resources, especially for, the Asian community. Yeah. And I think it was important for me to really, highlight, this particular, topic today, because, across my time feed as, a black male, I've seen other, black people in the community are asking, why are, quote unquote, the Asian communities getting this much attention? And I think it kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, when it comes to the social systemic awareness. I think with the advent of social media, a lot of these topics, including this particular topic, is nothing new within the state of California, but I think historically and systemically we should, have more acknowledgement of, things such as this within, the Asian community as well, because equally they have, the Asian community, in my opinion, have contributed equally as much into the wealth, into the growth of the state that we know now as California. Essentially, many of them migrated during the California Gold Rush period, and many of them was the motivating factors behind California becoming a thriving, one of the top economic states right now in the country. And definitely when it comes to infrastructure as well, we look at the railroads as well as other, important infrastructures that were essentially created and built within the state of California. I think it's important to really have this acknowledgement and really acknowledge the past, whether it be good or ugly at the same time.
Because the Asian Americans are people who built our railroad systems, right? Mm-hmm. And they, like you said, they're a huge contribution to the wealth in California, in our United States, So yeah, I think it's huge for them to be getting acknowledgement, and especially right now during, the pandemic, they've been getting a lot of Asian hate. So I think it's big for them to get acknowledged, and I think in that town of Antioch, the Asian population has risen a lot. So it's gotten a lot better there. It's a safe place for them to go and live, and I think there should be more spaces like that for everybody.
Exactly. And before we get into our next topic for today, I just want to remind new listeners out there that you're just listening right now to Unheard Voices here on Fridays from 3 to 4 p.m. I'm your host this week, Mr. Thairie Ritchie. I want to thank you for those that are tuning in right now to 90.7 FM, ksqd Santa Cruz. Also, thank you to those who are listening or live streaming right now on ksqd.org. You're just listening to my very special guest live in the studio right now this week, Mr. Juan Dominguez. He's a community organizer, community activist, and has his own podcast series called Burn the Wagon Series, focused on Indigenous issues. And our next topic I want to get into today, so more Indigenous issues, so out there on the other side of the world, so in the country of Australia. So this next topic I'm going to be introducing today with you all is basically members of Australia's Indigenous population is to receive reparations, which I was bringing up reparations a little bit earlier. So this is definitely correlating to this topic. So to put in context right now, the Australian federal government announced on August 5th, that it would pay about 280 million, so indigenous individuals, in reparations to certain members of the country's indigenous population. And up to 1 in 3 indigenous children in Australia are estimated to have been forcibly removed from their homes between 1910 and 1970 and placed in boarding schools and church-run institutions. This experience led to them being called the Stolen Generations. A national inquiry found that the efforts of these policies on Indigenous children were profoundly disabling. Children could not practice Aboriginal traditions nor customs and were not allowed to speak native languages. And while a national apology was given to survivors in 2008 by then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, the federal government stopped short of offering reparations. This recent announcement comes after a class action lawsuit which was filed against Australia's government in April 2021, just last year, by survivors of the schools and missions. And survivors who met certain criteria under the government's reparation plan will receive about $55,000, according to the Washington Post. And despite this gesture, data shows that Indigenous Australians continue to be negatively affected in areas like healthcare and incarceration at disproportionate rates when it comes to their non-Indigenous counterparts. And so with that one, I wanted to ask you this question with this topic. What are your initial thoughts on Australia's government giving reparations to the Indigenous population?
It's good. You said 55,000. I feel like that's a very small number. But considering the mental trauma, the physical trauma, everything that they have to go through, like you said, they couldn't speak their native language, they couldn't practice their traditions, they couldn't do anything. And for people that those traditions are so strong in them, to not be able to practice that is heartbreaking. It's soul breaking. They're essentially taking their soul from them, because this is a huge part of the native people here, at least. I'm sure it's the same in Australia. So it's a huge deal. At least they're getting recognition. But like I can't. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but that land is like a huge thing, because they were stolen from everything. Their land, their family, their people, everything, their traditions, everything. So I think it's a huge start to things to going the right way, but I think we have a long ways to go.
Right. And that's why I wanted to ask you as follow-up, like, should the country take more accountability for past actions and past trauma in Indigenous populations? Definitely when we were just bringing up there's still the Indigenous population, they're still negatively affected in the healthcare system as well as the incarceration system in the countries. Should you think there's more accountability that should be taken?
Yeah, absolutely, because the healthcare system that, at least here in America, that I'm used to, and it's called Indian Health Services, IHS. And, the doctors do the best that they can with what they're given, but it's usually not a lot. So if you go in that doctor and they don't have what you need, you're going to have to go to another place, which is probably pretty far away. So your chances of getting the right health care or getting the right diagnosis is not that high. So yeah, it's a huge thing to get representation. Like, that money could go towards so much more. The healthcare, the health system being built, like health facilities being built, like all so much more than just getting reparations to the people, because they're just trying to be like, here's your money, and then we're done. Like, that's my initial thought.
Yeah, that's kind of what brought me really the wrong way that's why I was kind of, snickering a little bit when I heard about the 55,000, because I was thinking that's clearly not enough to really restore justice, for this community, essentially within, this country, who pretty much Aboriginal, they're originated in this country, essentially. So essentially to be just given like 55,000 and essentially like as an apology, I don't think it's not clearly as enough to really restore, accountability and justice, essentially. And I think, it just piggyback off, even though they apologized, quote unquote in 2008, that clearly wasn't enough as well, because definitely communities are still suffering, vastly and majorly. And I think, even recently, with the fires that were going on recently in many areas that affected the Indigenous community, that's definitely, important as well, as far as establishing, more resources back into the community as well, instead of just, essentially giving money, but putting the money in the right resources that's going to be definitely needed when you bring up healthcare and other needed services.
Yeah, exactly, because there's probably not the proper facilities built, and like you said, I didn't really think about the fires, think about how much got destroyed, how much they need, at this point, and they don't need money directly given to them. They need things like, I don't want them to not make choices for themselves, but like at the same time, they need things built, and they can't build them themselves when they're given that money. It's hard for them to do that. They don't have the right resources. They don't know how to build a hospital. They don't know what they need to go through. So.
Especially right now, even when we were bringing up, Line 3, just earlier in the topic over in Minnesota, I think it all correlates to, issues of climate issues. So I think right now when we hear about climate issues, it's always spoken positively from a BIPOC perspective, non-person of color perspective. And I think, originally when I got into organizing, I started hearing about peaceful protests. The first people I thought of was the Indigenous community, and many of the peaceful protests that was about was focused around environmental issues such as having clean, adequate water, having clean resources, having clean air, essentially having resources that people can thrive on, people can live off of. So I think it's definitely important as well that, I think when it comes to giving reparations, establishing more, a climate solution to protecting, these communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Line 3, the reservation or wherever that land is, think about how much of that land is destroyed now that needs to be rebuilt or resourced. So much of that land just has oil in it. So many of the animals probably can't reproduce. There's a lot that goes into it other than just money,
Exactly. And then I just want to let new listeners know we're just now tuning in. We're just about a little over the half hour mark here at 90.7 FM. You're listening to Unheard Voices here on Fridays from 3 to 4 p.m. I'm your host this week, Mr. Thairie Ritchie. I just want to have my very special guest live in the studio this week, Mr. Juan Dominguez. He is a community organizer, community activist, and has his own podcast series, Burn the Wagon series. You can definitely follow him on that platform. And thank you to those who are tuning in live streaming on ksqd.org. And we're just going to go right into our next topic for this week. And so this is a topic I saw on my time feed I want to discuss with you all. So the Proud Boys, which is a right-wing militia group. So Proud Boys leader Henry Enrique Terraro was sentenced to 5 months in jail. So just to give further context to the listeners, so Henry Enrique Terraro, a national leader of the Proud Boys, a far-right group with a history of violence, was sentenced on Monday, August 23rd, just recently, to 5 months in jail for 2 crimes, including setting fire to a stolen Black Lives Matter banner during a tumultuous demonstration in Washington, D.C., a month after the election defeat of President Trump, who they were supporting at the time. In addition to the destruction of property offense, Terraro was sentenced with 2 felony counts of possessing high-capacity magazines. As part of a deal with prosecutors, one of the felony charges was dismissed, and the other was reduced to a misdemeanor count of attempted possession. So on July 19th, he pled guilty to that offense, plus the destruction of property charge. And I just want to get your just initial thoughts on hearing, him getting a 5 month, 5 month prison sentence?
It's like me and a friend were talking today, and it's good that it's going to be on his record and stuff. And I mean, I'm sure he doesn't care about that, but it's just weird that it's going to be only 5 months. I feel like for having high capacity, what was it, magazines, and did he have a rifle too? It should be more than that. You know what I mean? Because we never know what he could have done with that, with all the active shooter things that's going on with our world today. But yeah, I in my personal life, I try not to give people like him too much space, just because it's just I don't find people like them like sane. Just because if they, like me and you have been to countless protests with just the shirts on our backs, and why do they have to always be at every protest with the bulletproof vests, with the like they're ready to go to war? Why does it have to be a militant militia thing? Why does it always have to be intimidation factor? So like I just try not to give people like that too much space, but I definitely think it should be more than 5 months. It should be a lot more than what he's facing. He should be. I don't know if it should be should be considered a hate crime, because here in Santa Cruz, what happened to the Black Lives mural downtown should have also been a hate crime. When things are done like that, especially he probably publicized it on Facebook, on whatever social media platforms he has. So yeah, there's definitely probably footage of it too, so you can find it. So there's definitely much more he should be charged with.
Yeah, and, it's funny you brought that up. I actually saw the footage, essentially, I think a few months ago, as it was happening. It was posted by many people who were part of that group and part of that, demonstration. I was kind of braggadocious about it, and it was more striking for me to where they took the Black Lives Matter, flag from. It was essentially a black church that they noticed that had the flag hanging, and they just snatched it from the church and pretty much, brought it to the street to essentially burn and, stomp it to the ground, essentially. And so for me, not only was that, just flat out disrespect, in my opinion, I think it was just flat out, another issue of asserting, white supremacy and inserting that issue of fear and hate and hatred towards, a segment of the community that they disagree with when it comes to issues of Black Lives Matter, issues of, Black liberation, which I think, for me, whether, people have, back and forth issue with Black Lives Matter mean, but for me, it's a new form of liberation when people say that, when I've heard that, across my time feed and across, demonstrations and protests that we've been to as well. I think it's essentially a term I feel like it's evolved essentially over time when it comes to, instead of saying Black Power, Black Liberation, I think it evolved to saying Black Lives Matter, essentially just saying like Black lives just matter.
Yeah.
It just matters, essentially. And so I think it's very, disappointing to hear disheartening views of like saying all lives matter, not just Black lives matter, all lives matter. I think personal and common sense know that all lives matter, but when you look at the time feed, you look at the statistics, it shows that Black lives aren't really mattering as much when it comes to the criminal justice system, as well as, other social systemic issues, research in past, how, even learn about, past traumas when we, talk about, the issue of putting critical race theory in schools. I think it definitely is reflective of a society that's kind of afraid to admit the past mistakes, essentially. And I think it's kind of funny about the Black Lives Matter mural that was defaced in Santa Cruz as well, right in front of City Hall. I think for that instance, it was more, I think, a reflection of the city that was more in the light portraying as progressive, but in the light it still has that lingering issue of divisiveness and hatred when it comes to seeing that term Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so crazy how much controversy comes from just that one statement. Just saying Black Lives Matter can spark up so much controversy in certain people. And that's just so wild to me. And I will absolutely say that till I die. You know what I mean? And like you said, it's liberating to say it. It's absolutely liberating to be on the right side of history. Even though we've been counted out since, so long in history, but I feel like this pandemic hopefully has woken up a lot of people and has caused a lot of people to actually notice that Black lives haven't, like you said, haven't hit, like in the numbers, haven't been mattering to people. So I think hopefully we can continue this fire and this momentum into the future, and like I said, continue to change that white supremacy. You know what I mean? Like you continue saying, and that's my whole topic in Burn the Wagon. Because Burn the Wagon essentially is just destroying. When we're destroying that capitalism thought of conversation. We're going back to our old ways of speaking. We're speaking to each other like we should be. I absolutely am for all of that. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And speaking of the right side of history, before I get into our next topic, which is here locally in Santa Cruz, I just want to remind new listeners out there, you're just now tuning in to 90.7 FM, ksqd Santa Cruz. You're listening right now to Unheard Voices here on Fridays from 3 to 4 p.m. Thank you to those who are live streaming this episode on ksqd.org. I'm your host this week, Mr. Thairie Ritchie, and I have a very special guest. You're just listening live in the studio this week. He's a community organizer, community activist, Mr. Juan Dominguez. You can also check out his podcast series, Burn the Wagon series, on YouTube, as well as other social media outlets as Instagram and Facebook. And so it's definitely a blessing to have him in the studio and talk about this very last topic we're going to talk about today. It's very historical, significant here in the city of Santa Cruz. So just tomorrow afternoon at Mission Street Plaza, so Santa Cruz Mission Street Plaza, at 1 p.m., the El Camino bell removal ceremony will be taking place in the city of Santa Cruz. So the historical removal of the last standing El Camino rail mission bell marker in downtown Santa Cruz, and directly from California Indigenous leaders and scholars about the true history of California mission systems. So the city of Santa Cruz has unanimously resolved to remove all El Camino rail bells from public property following requests by the Amamutsin tribal band, and will now become the first city in California to do so. So the Amamutsin tribal band are calling for the statewide removal of the El Camino rail bell markers, all other monuments that attempt to glorify and celebrate the domination, the dehumanization, and the erasure of indigenous people of California. So the mission bells to them symbolize the enslavement of indigenous people in the California mission system. So that El Camino rail bell markers were created in the early 1900s to promote automotive tourism and visitation of the missions, and to celebrate the whitewashed, romanticized, and distorted history. And so this is a very historical event, and I just wanted to get your initial thoughts on that.
It's going to be an amazing event, and I just want to put this is the El Camino Real means the Royal Road, and it's a 700 mile long. Did you mention this?
No, definitely mention to the listeners.
Yeah, it's a 700. I didn't know this about it, to be honest. It's a 700 mile long mission trail connecting all the missions, and it's another thing, just exactly like the residential schools you keep mentioning. It's once we start searching these missions, what are we going to find? What are we going to find at these missions? Are we going to find, tribal artifacts? Are we going to what are we going to find at these places? Are we going to find more children? Unfortunately, So yeah, I think it's a huge event. I'm so excited to be able to be to attend it, and I have someone from my tribe. She said she's making acorn for the event. I think so that acorn mush is like a big thing that from our tribe that we would eat.
What's the name of your tribe?
It's a Pomo tribe out of Mendocino County. So Pointerina is the name of the town. So yeah, we get acorn mush, mushes it up, and it's a huge thing in our tribe. So it's a blessing to be able to hopefully try some that someone from my tribe made. So this is going to be a huge event, and I'm glad to be a part of it and watch it go down. Because it was put in originally in 1906, I believe. So that's a huge, to take the last one out here in Santa Cruz and to be able to watch that is going to be amazing. I'm going to be I'm really happy to be a part of it.
And I'm actually going to be at the event as well. I'm very blessed and fortunate to be able to take some time off to be able to attend the event as well. And that's why I want to, I'm blessed to have you in the studio when it comes to this topic. So that's why I want to ask this next follow-up. What does this historical event mean to you as a local of Santa Cruz and as an Indigenous individual?
It's amazing, and like I said, I'm gonna be so happy to be there and watch it. I'm sure the tribal members that are gonna be there attending and watching it get removed on their land is gonna be amazing, you know, and definitely is gonna be awesome to for myself to be a part of it. And hopefully this is a start in a movement of more things like this to be removed, because the history has to be told. You know, like you said before, people are kind of afraid to let that history come up and bubble up and be told, because they think that it's going to be directed like it was directly their ancestors. But we just want the history to be told. We don't want to come back and get revenge on you or whatever. You know, we just want this history to be told, and we just want a voice, and we just want to be a part of things that are happening. And that's the main thing for us, you know, is land back doesn't mean we're gonna kick you out and take everything and you know, we won't have anything. We just want to be a part of the system. We just want to be a part of voices. We just want to be a part of conversations. We just want to be in spaces that we haven't been allowed in before.
I think that's really important to highlight when it comes to, you know, reiterating what the term land back means. I think it's very important to really highlight that, you know, from Indigenous perspectives. I think when you hear even that term, you know, land back, you know, I think it comes, you know, when we speak about the divisiveness, you know, unfortunately it comes with a lot of divisiveness. Even though I don't see it, I sense that a lot within the community when you say the term land back in a lot of ways. I think it comes with a lot of, you know, worrisome, you know, paranoia of which creates the divisiveness. I think the same way when you say the term defund the police, it's not essential for me as an organizer. It's saying essentially we don't want to get rid of the system completely. It's just the resources that you have right now, it could be completely reallocated to different resources. And I think you put the term land back, people get immediately like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You get kicked off my land. No, it's this, as you're reiterating, you definitely want to establish the space of creating more social awareness on the history, which would be, you know, whether it be good and the bad. Definitely it's important to acknowledge it, you know, first and foremost, which is important. But I think, you know, having, you know, more Indigenous, you know, people in these spaces and having the acknowledgement of these important ceremonies and teaching people this important history. When I was bringing up critical race theory, you know, definitely important, not just in schools, but just socially, you know, in conversation, you know, when it comes to, you know, different platforms, media platforms, you know, different social conversations, different, you know, talking circles. Definitely is important to really, you know, learn about these histories and learn about why is this, you know, bell removal significant for Indigenous communities. I think is very important.
It is very important, you know, and like I said, we don't want people to be pushed out. We just want adequate living for certain people, because certain people don't have that running water. Certain people don't have certain things, you know.
Yeah, appreciate that. Just before we go off, just to remind listeners, this is Unheard Voices here from 3 to 4 p.m. on Fridays. I'm your host, Mr. Thairie Ritchie, and you're just listening to my guest live in studio today, community organizer, community activist. Please listen to the series, Burn the Wagon series on YouTube, as well as other platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, Mr. Juan Dominguez. And also, please, if you're in Santa Cruz, definitely check out the El Camino Bell Removal Ceremony, which will be happening tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. at the Santa Cruz Mission Plaza. It will take place from 1 to 5 p.m.
Thank you both. Juan, hope to have you back. I really appreciate the hour. Thairie and Juan, great hour. This is ksqd Santa Cruz. Stay tuned for the Tom Hartman program from 4 to 5. At 5 o'clock we have Narrative Species with Clefel interviewing a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Exclusive interview with Muhammad Yunus. A fascinating conversation about his book, A Row of Three Zeros, The New Economics of Zero Poverty, Zero Unemployment, and Zero Net Carbon Emissions. That's coming up at